It's clobbering time!
Welcome to the continued podcast adventures of Superhero Speak.
But I think many of the people that love this character and that love superheroes in general have used these stories as inspiration to say, you know what, I'm going to do something good in the world. I'm going to make a difference like my hero when I was a kid.
That is my fondest memory of it, because when you're doing comic books, you want them to affect people. Right. You want people to care. You want to strike emotions. And I knew that Clone Saga was striking a lot of emotions.
Can you imagine Pulp Fiction starring Goofy and Mickey Mouse?
I can totally imagine that.
I'm sure somebody's written that one too.
Quarter pounder with cheese in France, Mickey? What? Royale with cheese, Mickey. Yeah. I can totally
see.
I would watch the hell out of that movie.
Yes, I gladly sacrifice that my progeny to you, almighty Marvel beast.
But Neil Adams is somewhere going, it's my time.
How do you measure success? Hey everyone, you are listening to the sultry sounds of Superhero Speak, and I am your host, Dave.
And this is John.
And JD is not here this week. We gave him the night off, because John, you decided to take last week off for sneezing fits.
Yeah, if your stock in Kleenex went up last week, you'll know the reason why.
But the main reason that JD is not here is actually because we're going to be talking about our experience at the Great Philly Comic-Con this year. And unfortunately, since JD lives in Chicago and wasn't able to make it out, he wasn't there and really wouldn't have a lot to offer. And, he'd rather spend the night with his family anyway. So
yeah, the funny thing about this is that, unlike years past, we've gotten all the interviews and the pictures together. We're going to be putting them out on our website now. I know it's 2 weeks after, but we work for a living. We have things. We have life we got to deal with. But we're getting them out. And like years past, we're just getting them out now. We're going to take the next couple of weeks. We've got maybe 4 weeks of interviews to put out.
Something like that.
And yet we're recording this on a Monday. This Thursday and Friday I have off because we're going to the Wizard Comic-Con.
Yes.
So literally we will have enough interviews because I'm sure I'll get at least 10 more interviews from WizardCon. We're going to have interviews from these Comic-Cons for the next however many weeks, maybe 5 weeks or so. It's going to be fun.
Yes. And the other thing is we had a really big movie to talk about 2 weeks ago, which was, of course, the one and only Infinity War. And then after that, we had an interview, somebody who had wanted to be on the show for a while, and he's got a really good all-ages book he wanted to promote, and we wanted to give him a spotlight. So, things happen. So here we are. Oh, so, John, let's talk about the big sad news before we get into this.
Oh, yeah. You saw my post?
Yeah, well, I actually heard it. I was at work. We were having lunch, and one of my coworkers stuck his head out of his office and blurted it out. And of course, I'm talking about Margot Kidder passed away over the weekend at the age of 69. And for me and John, at least, I think John will agree with this. She was our Lois Lane. Before the Batman movies, before all the Marvel movies, before Blade, before any of that stuff, we had the 77 Superman movie. And of course, it starred Christopher Reeve as Clark Kent Superman and Margot Kidder as Lois Lane. And
she was the mold for Lois Lane that all other Lois Lanes would be poured into, and none ever measured up. I mean, the problem being that she was, I forget in the comics before that, because this was even old for me. I did see this in the theater, of course, because, I'm old. But when being as young as I was seeing this, she was this dynamic, take charge woman who didn't take crap from anybody and was good at her job, and was just this presence. And since I don't know if in the comics that's the way Lois Lane was portrayed before, or if she was just always the damsel in distress. I mean, still a little damsel in distress in the movie, but she, she went out and she went and got stories, and she just, again, this presence. And after that was the measuring stick for all other women in comic books, even for some of the heroines, is like, are they just there to be wallpaper for the men, or are they there to be their own heroes or villains, or in this case, the person that grounds Superman to humanity? And she did. Margot Kidder was just, man, I mean, when she was on screen, she was there. I mean, you felt for her. She was good.
Yeah, I mean, I have some of the early comics. The I have actually a collection of the newspaper serials from the 40s.
Yeah,
and I also have an omnibus from the early comics for Superman. And yes, Lois Lane was very much, especially in the early days, the damsel in distress. The early Superman comics are very sexist.
It was the 40s and 50s.
And I have to say that even through the 60s, you had women's lib movement starting. I mean, and women were getting more recognized in positions of power, but this was the first time, yes, she's, like you said, she's the human that connects Superman to Earth, and to
humanity. She's the one who grounded this god.
To Margot Kidder's credit, she played this no-nonsense, take charge, hard-nosed reporter, but then could be very feminine against, the very masculine Superman played by Christopher Reeve. So she had that range. She could be both worlds, and she, played it beautifully. And,
and also you have to keep in mind that Superman, when it came out, was like literally the first superhero movie.
Yes.
It's 1978, and you had the likes of Gene Hackman, Marlon Brando, Christopher Reeve, not so well known, but Ned Beatty. I mean, just all these people that were not unknowns, especially like Marlon Brando and Gene Hackman. I mean, geez. And they put together this superhero movie that, was awesome if you see the Donner cut. And, it's just, and to have her as part of that ensemble, and to have her play Lois Lane, and to make Lois Lane such an iconic character, in a live action film was just, it was gold. And there's that one quote that everybody's going to remember, the whole, "You've got me, who's got you?"
Yes.
Still, I'm really going to, it's really hard. I mean, we lost her, we lost Carrie Fisher, we're losing, for somebody my age, it's like you're losing your childhood. It really sucks.
We're getting old, John.
Yeah.
Quick fun fact about Margot Kidder.
Mm-hmm.
She, of course, was born in Canada, became an American citizen actually pretty late in her life, but at one point she dated Pierre Trudeau, who was the Prime Minister of Canada and is also father of Justin Trudeau, the current Prime Minister of Canada. So, just a fun little connection.
Neat. And like two more connections and you get to, Kevin Bacon, right?
There you go. Yes.
I'm sure there's a Kevin Bacon there somewhere. All right.
So,
Well, speaking of grief.
Well.
I did it.
He did a segue. Well, actually, before we get to grief, we should talk about the con in general. I mean, we normally do that, you know.
So, speaking about grief,
this was our 4th year as a podcast attending the show. Your 3rd year, John.
My 3rd year attending here, but we've been out. Podcast's been around for 5 now.
Right. But we didn't, you know, this is our 4th year going to this show.
Yeah, I didn't go with you guys the first couple of times.
Yes, yeah. And it's actually grown quite a bit.
Yes.
Since it started.
So this is my 3rd year, and in just that amount of time, it's gone from a small to medium-size-ish convention where you could go over to the tables where the stars were, where the guests, quote-unquote, were, and if nobody was around, you could just strike up a conversation with them and have a nice little chat. It's gone from that to now there are posted signs where you're almost getting to the point where if you pull your camera out near the guests, you're going to get slide tackled. And on the one hand, I'm glad it's growing because it's a good con. On the other hand, and we've talked about this before, there were a lot less vendors there with actual comic books. And it's getting harder for people to interact with the stars. The stars are almost just there, you know, for you to have 5 seconds with for a picture and a signature and that's it.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't know. I'm split on this. I was hoping because this is the one con where we were able to go in and talk to just about anybody. That's how I got to talk to Marina Sirtis and Bruce Boxleitner and a few others. And just, you know, you walk up, you say, "Hey, how you doing?" Yeah, nobody's around. So you want to talk on this microphone? You know,
is that your secret?
Well, yeah, basically. And this year was, you know, I'm sorry, you'll have to talk to their agent. Okay, well, now we got to email the agent, and hopefully the agent's around to answer us. And not everybody had the same agent, and it just, you know, it got. So anyway,
it's good and bad.
Yeah,
there's still the main con in the area that's putting artists first. Again, when you walk in, it's still Artist Alley when you walk in, and then you have to go to the back to get to the celebrities.
Artists and authors, which is nice.
Yes. But as the celebrities get bigger, you know, you run that risk of eventually they might switch it, and that's when my concerns really will be raised. If next year we go and the celebrities are up front and the artists are in the back, then we'll have to see. But I don't think so, because I know some of the guys who work the con and run it, and they are all about the comic books. You know, the celebrities are just a nice bonus. I mean, they had, unfortunately, we didn't get to talk to any of these people. They had most of the cast of Black Lightning there.
Yeah, which is big.
They had Mike Coulter, you know, Luke Cage from Netflix.
Yeah. They had Val Kilmer there. That was weird.
Well, he was Batman once.
Well, yeah, but he's notorious for not being sociable.
Yeah.
So, and he was the only one where you could not see him. He was always behind a curtain.
Yeah. Well, that's some of that social anxiety you were just talking about.
Yeah, anxiety, sure. But we did get to talk to, well, one of the people we did get to talk to, one of the stars we'll get to in a few minutes. But, you know, the rest, I mean, it's still small enough that they filled their ranks with wrestlers and Power Rangers.
Yes. This con, at least for the last 3 years, has been, if you're a Power Rangers fan, you want to go here because
Right.
it's loaded with people from Power Rangers. I'm not saying that's a bad thing.
And a couple of Doctor Who's there. There were a couple of Doctor Who's.
Yes, there were.
So,
and we'll get to that in a second. So yeah, our first interview, which is, I even mentioned this at the beginning. This was our first con interview for the whole year. Of course, we were walking around and we saw the Source Point Press guys. They've been on the show. We've interviewed them. We've reviewed some of their books on the website.
Mm-hmm.
And we started talking and, oh, geez, I don't have my notes in front of me.
Oh, Frank Gogol.
Yes.
Freelance writer.
The guys there were like, oh, you should talk to Frank.
Mm-hmm.
Frank Gogol, this is his first book. And it was called, as you alluded to multiple times so far, John, the book is called Grief.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually a story about going through the 7 stages of grief. And,
geez, I've seen more stages than that, but go ahead. I mean, because I know one of the stages is called alcohol, right?
No, that's just you, John.
And there's like 3 sub-stages. There's like, it's whiskey, and then cordials, and then grain, I think.
So what made Frank's story interesting to me is that he wanted to be a comic book writer, and then he went to a workshop through this school called Comics Experience, and he did a workshop on how to write a comic. They helped him put together a script on his idea, and then workshopped with him with different artists, and they put the book together, and then now they have a deal with Source Point Press, where now they put the book out through Source Point. So, like, all of that was so super cool, and he's like the first book through Source Point. So I think I've done enough damage and telling you everything about the interview. So
well, and just to make sure, I mean, the book Grief is it's a comic book about how people deal with grief.
Yes.
So, and he'll explain it. But it's nice to see this kind of thing coming up, because it's not just all superheroes. We've started to see smatterings of this around at different conventions, where there are books that are not mainstream that are dealing with more than just the superhero genre. There's this one. There's another one that we'll do we have another interview that we'll put out a little bit later about somebody who wrote a book about how to deal with being a grown up. So it's really,
I know
it's
a lot
interesting.
of people that need that book.
Yeah, well, I bought 3 copies. So,
oh, okay, good.
But it's nice to see this kind of thing where, people are basically writing books about growing, about, personal growth and helping people in need. And it's, I'm glad we got to talk to him.
Right. So without further ado, take it away, Frank. Pew pew.
Hey everyone, we are here doing our actual first interview from this year's Great Philly Comic Con. We're here with Frank Gogol, writer of the independent book Grief, which is available through Source Point Press and Comics Experience, and Frank's going to tell us all about that. So, first question we usually like to start off is writing something that you always wanted to do?
Yes, it is. I remember watching Saturday morning cartoons when I was a kid. I grew up in the early 90s. I was born in 87, so I was,
okay.
So Spider-Man and X-Men were on, and I was
right.
like, these guys are awesome. Then I got into comic books, and I wanted to do it for a long time, and I actually geared most of my high school education and the entirety of my college education through 2 master's degrees towards learning how to write.
Oh, okay.
It didn't pay off very much, but Comics Experience helped out with that. Yeah.
So what is Comic Experience exactly?
Comics Experience is a formerly in-person, now online comics creation school.
Right.
It was created by Andy Schmidt, who you may have heard of a little book called Civil War or Annihilation over at Marvel. He was the editor on that. Or the Transformers franchise at IDW. He was the editor on that. He wanted to create this resource for people who wanted to learn how to write and draw comics that he saw sort of a gap in the world for. It didn't exist. Lots of books, lots of sort of how-tos, but nothing sort of formal and with any sort of authority, I guess you could say.
Okay.
So he started that, and you got guys like Kyle Higgins out of it. So he's doing great things over at Boom with Power Rangers. And He's done a lot of Marvel and DC stuff. So it's a essentially, long story short, too long didn't read. It's a writing and drawing school for people who want to do comics.
Cool. And did Grief come out of what you learned from them?
Yeah. So Source Point Press and Comics Experience have a very, very new co-publishing program where if you participate in Comics Experience in any one of the several capacities you can, as a student, as a member of the forums, as a mentee. I think maybe there's one more I'm forgetting, but if you participate in Comics Experience, they have semi-regular open submissions a couple times a year, and if you've workshopped something in some capacity or some member of your creative team has, you are able to submit. So my book was one of 4 books from the first wave, along with Andy's book, Achilles Inc., a book called Wretched Things by Devin Wong and Ken Perry, and another miniseries called Family Graves by Tim Bach and Brian Atkins. So we submitted our books, and we were up against, I think there were 20 submissions in the first round, and they pared it down to the 4 they wanted to launch with, and that's how you got this first wave.
Cool. So for our listeners, can you give us the elevator pitch of what Grief is?
I'm still trying to refine this. This is my second con selling the book in person. First was C2E2, which was sort of mind-blowing for a first in-person con. But I started off by shoving the book in people's faces saying, have you ever been sad? And that didn't really get me very far. But so where I'm at now, which seems to be working, is it's a collection of short stories, 10 short stories. They're genre stories. It's horror, it's science fiction, there's some drama, there's superheroes. But the thing that sort of links them all thematically is it's about characters going through the grieving process, or one stage of the 5. You sort of catch up with people at different points. And I think that's sort of talking to people, because who hasn't, lost a family member or been depressed or had a bully? I think we all sort of grieve in different ways, and there's a story type and genre in there for everybody.
Do you have a personal experience that kind of brought it on, or?
Well, I think the thing that really people end up liking is there's an essay in the back where I talk about why I chose to do a book about grief.
Okay.
It's called Why Grief. And I talk about sort of how I grew up and the sort of struggles and the trials and tribulations I had, sort of encounters with depression, stuff like the things that I poured into the story. Some of the stories are semi-autobiographical. Some of them kind of are autobiographical, though. It's hard to tell because I try not to put too much of myself on the page. But yeah, it's a book that is me. But I wanted to. So I saw a hole when I was growing up. I got into comics because I was sort of hiding in my bedroom, sort of ducking away from mom and dad, fighting and other stuff going on with my family. But when I looked at Superman, he was punching aliens and saving the planet. I liked it, but I couldn't really relate to it.
Okay.
So I wanted those kinds of stories. I wanted aliens, I wanted monsters, but I also wanted relatable characters. So I wrote these very character-driven stories that were also genre stories.
So for the people who are listening, where can they pick up the book?
Well, it came out from Source Point Press at C2E2 earlier this month, April 6th or 8th. And it is currently available in person at any shows that C2E or Source Point Press is out. Okay. It's available on my website, frankgogol.com. And it will be in previews for local comic shops in June.
Oh, cool.
For an August 29th release date, I believe.
Yeah, that's probably June. It's probably August. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
So you've got options.
All right.
Yeah. It's also on drive-through if you want it digitally.
All right. Cool. And then frankgogol.com is where people can find you if they want to learn more about you?
Yeah. FrankGogol.com.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I don't know why I went pew pew. I mean,
I was going to ask about that, but then I thought, I really don't want to know.
Yeah, you don't. Trust me, you really don't. So that was interesting. And then, of course, when we were talking to Frank, I was like, oh, wow, this comic experience thing sounds really cool. And he goes, oh, well, do you know Andy Schmidt? I'm like, the name sounds familiar, but I don't know why. He's like, oh, he started the school, and he's right over there. And he was like the booth across from them.
Yeah. And this was funny because we had a couple of interviews like that. It's like, okay, now that you've finished talking with me, you should talk to the person right to my left. And we basically worked our way down that whole hallway.
Yes, actually we did.
But, this interview you did on your own because I forget if I left you or you left me, and I got bored. I think maybe I wandered, and you went and did this interview, and I went and did a couple of other interviews.
Yes, and you're always leaving me. I'm used to that by now. So what made this interview interesting to me, and you'll hear this in a second, is I've stated many times on this podcast that I had gotten out of collecting. The Clone Saga is kind of what did me in. Hadn't collected for years, and then all of a sudden Frank Miller wrote this story, Civil War. It was a big event in the comics, huge crossover, got me back in. I went back and bought House of M and Avengers Disassembled and a lot of the books that led up to Civil War. And Andy ended up he was the editor on Civil War. So
nice.
So yeah. So we had this is interesting. We had a really great conversation because I had a lot of questions about how does one become a comic book editor, but then how does one take that and then turn that into a school? Again, his school is Comics Experience, and it's open to anyone. You can go in if you want to be a writer and artist. They workshop with you. They help you develop your idea, and then at the end of the class, they take it to Source Point and see if you can get it published or not. So, yeah, I mean, it's a great concept. It's a great school. So I'm not going to, bury the lead too much more. I'm just going to let Andy speak for himself. So take it away, Dave.
All right, everyone. Yeah, we're now here with Andy Schmidt. Most people know him as a writer. Most people, at least I, know you as the editor of Civil War. Okay. But you also have a very interesting background, as we were just talking about. You also started Comics Experience, which is for people wanting to break into the comics business as a writer or artist. Right. So, how did that come about?
Well, I started editing at Marvel back in 2002, and I'm probably best known for working on things like Civil War and the Winter Soldier. But, I was really the driving force behind Annihilation, which led to the Guardians of the Galaxy sort of resurgence. And then after I left Marvel, I started Comics Experience so I could teach new creators all about writing and art and editing and how the business works, all that kind of stuff. Right. And so I took that online, but that came from sort of merging my two loves of comics and teaching. Before I was an editor at Marvel, I taught at the university level in St. Louis at Webster University. And, and so, I kind of merged them. I started my own business, and I kind of thought, at the time, I left Marvel. I was going to be a stay-at-home dad. My wife and I just had our first son, and so it was like, I'll do this kind of part-time, and then part-time, it just started growing, largely from word of mouth. I wasn't pouring tons of money into marketing. It just sort of took on a life of its own. And then I went. Now I consult and I do writing. So I write comics, I write children's books, I write video games, I write pretty much anything. I seem to be kind of a go-to guy when you want something done in a certain franchise. I've worked on almost everything I loved as a kid at this point. So
right. It almost sounds like you've had a storybook career in that sense, and
I've been very lucky.
Yes.
Yeah. My brothers are jealous, which is my favorite thing in the world. It's just you know.
Yeah, I agree. If I can make my brothers jealous, it makes me happy.
Right, that's what it's all about.
Yes.
Yeah.
So like, what is? I'm trying to think. Oh, here's a good question, actually. A lot of people don't know this, and whenever we have an editor on the show, I do try to ask this. What do you see as the main difference or the main role of an editor, especially when it comes to comics? Because people don't really understand what an editor does.
Oh, yeah. Anytime I tell somebody I edit comics, they're like, so you draw them? No.
Right.
So you write them? Well, sort of. You know, sometimes.
Right.
But, the main role of an editor, and it one of the reasons why there's no, like, set definition is that it changes from company to company.
Okay.
You know, or my role, but when I'm editing, like, a creator-owned series that somebody else created, like I treat that differently because when I'm at Marvel or if I'm at IDW and I'm working on G.I. Joe or Transformers or something, like at the end of the day, either the company I'm working for or the licensor, they have the yes or no power. It's theirs, right? On a creator-owned title, and I'm asked to edit the creator on his or her own title, well, I'll give my notes. I give the same kinds of notes to hopefully make the story stronger, but it's their call. It's their thing. It's their property. So you have to kind of approach it, you know, with a different eye, you know, that sort of thing, and understand and a real like sort of compassion for the creators involved. And you gotta have compassion even when it's, you know, owned by the company. Otherwise, people are gonna hate you and they'll never work with you again.
Right.
But when I look at it sort of philosophically, what the role of the editor is to help the creative team tell their story to the best of their ability. So it's not, and I'm not saying that projects don't happen where the editor sort of instigates it or comes up with the idea. Certainly I've got projects like that. Annihilation is a good example of that.
Right.
But I hand it over. Like, here's what we're doing. Like, here's the goal, but you're going to work on Nova. You guys are doing Super Skrull over here, you know, and then I have to hand it over and let them tell their story within that context. And then my job is to give notes to be like, well, what have you thought about this? Have you thought about this approach? What about turning the character, you know, this way, you know, twisting the knife for your reader, like all that kind of stuff, just to amp it up. But you know, I think editors get into trouble if they're trying to dictate the story. Like the writer's job, the artist's job isn't just to type what I want them to type or to draw what I want them to type. I want their creative voices really coming through.
All right, so I have a question. I don't know if you want to answer this or not. It has to do with Civil War.
Okay.
So when
I'll answer it.
Oh, okay. So I met Mark Miller years ago, and we were talking about Civil War, and I asked him, is that how you wanted the story to end originally? And he said, no, I wanted it to end with the death of Captain America, but I was told no, that they were saving that, you know, for a later issue. So were you the one that had to deliver that news to him?
I was not.
No,
my boss was at the time Tom Brevoort, who's still there and still running a ton of books there. He was the one that had to deliver that. But you know, and my memory of it may be off. I mean, it's been a decade or so now.
Yes.
But my memory of it was that was a discussion. That it wasn't like, no, that's not happening. But like Ed Brubaker, had this long run on Cap. He had all this stuff going on with Cap and the Winter Soldier and all this sort of stuff, and it seemed sort of disingenuous to take that out of Cap's book.
Okay.
And so that was kind of how that's my memory of it. I could be wrong.
No, and
that's my memory. And I don't remember. I mean, maybe Mark was upset, but I don't remember him being particularly upset.
Oh no, he did not seem upset about it at all. You know, he understands business is business, but I did agree with him that it would have made a much better ending to that story than them just going, oh, look at what we're doing, I give up, and walk away from each other. You know, it's the only thing that's ever bothered me about that book.
It bothered me when Iron Man made a deal with villains. That bothered me.
Yeah, well, it really bothered me when Peter made a deal with the devil to erase his marriage, but we won't get into that.
That's not my...
That was way after you.
That's not me. I didn't do that. Yeah, well, you know, I mean, the thing is editing, writing, doing the art, you know, we all make mistakes. We all, you know, we try to push the envelope one way or the other. I mean, I remember feeling, and I know and I don't want to speak for him, but I'm reasonably confident that Tom felt very similarly, probably even more so, that like the idea of bringing Bucky back for the Winter Soldier was like that was a no-no. Like, I mean, Bucky, like that was that's like sort of one of the 3 precious Marvel deaths. Like, you don't touch that. And I remember, like, you know, he kind of tasked us, all of us on the editorial team, with like, find every hole, I don't care how small it is, and poke every hole you can into this story, because if we get this wrong even a little, like, we're all going to get massacred by the fans.
Right.
And I think he's right, and I think, you know, I mean, I haven't talked to Ed in quite a while, or Steve about this, but I think even they would agree that us being as hard as we were on them, you know, helped make the story better.
I mean, it's a great story, and I mean, Bucky coming back is one of the greatest moments, I think, in recent Marvel history, and ended up being one of the best characters, you know. I mean, I enjoyed the run of him as Captain America, you know, like...
Well, and I also, you know, I want to be clear that, like, I'm taking no credit for how good that is. Like, Ed and Steve and Michael Lark, like, they came in... Mike came on a little bit later. It was really Ed and Steve at the beginning, but Mike flowed right in, and he understood, and he was on board 100%. Like, those guys really, like, I mean, that was really their thing. And they came in with the idea. We may have helped refine it. Like I said, our job was to help them tell their story. And I think that's a really good example of a creative team and an editorial team. I don't remember us arguing ever. I just remember some discussions, you know. They were great to work with.
Yeah, I mean, I in a former life, I was a musician, so being around other creative people, I know how that can be. So it's cool. It's good to hear that you guys just were amicable about all of that. Question. So we started this conversation. You were an editor at Marvel. Is that something, like, did you want to be an editor? How does that happen? You know.
Well, there's a lot of different ways you can get in
like,
editorial.
Did you go to school for that, or?
Well, I went to college in the South. I went to college in a place called Sewanee in Tennessee.
All right.
It's a small liberal arts. I mean, it's a well-respected school, but I majored in philosophy with a minor in studio fine arts, like video production and sculpture, and another minor in religion. So basically, I thought deep thoughts about being unemployed for a while after I graduated.
All right.
And I worked at a bookstore, and I decided, like, I should probably go to school for something I can use to make a living. So I put myself through schools, a master's degree program in media communications. And that was a 2-year program. I had to write a big, you know, giant thesis paper at the end and everything. And when I was doing that, and at this point I was living in St. Louis, and so what I did was I started writing all these papers for all these different courses. I was, you know, media and law, media literacy, media, you know, whatever, and all those papers were about comics. You know, it was media law with comics or whatever. And so during that process, I realized, like, I'm writing all this stuff about comics. Clearly, I got comics on my brain.
Right.
You know, I grew up reading, of course, and all that sort of stuff. And but then I sort of really was looking at it academically. And then the school asked me to teach to create an undergraduate class curriculum. So then I started teaching about comics, and you know, I had some friends in New York, so I flew up there and got some conversations at both Marvel and DC, and went into the offices and met a bunch of people that I didn't think I'd be able to meet. And and then eventually I wound up just interviewing. A friend of mine up there told me there's a job opening, so I interviewed for it and got it. And then I dropped everything and moved to New York.
Wow.
For pennies.
What would you tell somebody who wanted to get into, you know, being an editor today?
Like I said, there's a lot of different ways to do it. Most assistant editors that come in straight from college.
Okay.
I was, even at the time, like 15 years ago, I was kind of an exception that I had been out of college for a number of years.
Right.
And been in the workforce and all that sort of stuff. So what I would say is, you know, study something you love, study storytelling, study visual storytelling if you can. Like that video and film production background that I had it was a minor. Like I wasn't out making giant movies or anything, but knowing how to break stories down visually, knowing like what the 180-degree rule is, and understanding how all of that works was really helpful. Now, there's a lot more I learned on the job. But one of the things I did when I was at Marvel was I actually created I revised their internship program to make sure that interns were actually learning more about comics, like visual storytelling in comics.
Okay.
And then I also wound up creating their assistant editor training program. So when you would get hired, you'd spend 3 days with me first, and I'd run through how visual storytelling worked, how panel descriptions should be written effectively, go through all of that kind of stuff to get them ready for the job, because there are very few places where you can learn this.
Right.
Which feels like a really good segue for me to say Comics Experience is one of them.
I was going to say.
So check that out, comicsexperience.com. Sign up for the newsletter, that kind of thing. But But yeah, and that's what I did when I left Marvel. I created Comics Experience specifically with this litmus test in mind, which is I wanted to create the courses I wished existed when I was trying to break in.
Right.
I wanted to create the resource that I didn't have
Yeah.
for other people. And now that it's grown over 10 years, we've got a publishing program teamed up with SourcePoint Press so that you can come in, you can hone your craft, you can get to know how it all works, and you can even get your first work published, and it's a whole progression. And I look at this and man, I wish this was around, because I was so eager to learn. I knew I had a lot to learn, but I didn't know where to go for it.
Right.
And now that we're online, we've had students on 6 continents at this point.
That was going to be a question. So is it a physical place you go, or is it all online?
It's all online now. I'll travel to convention circuits, and I'll do panels and stuff at conventions live.
Right.
And I'm always happy to talk to folks at shows and whatever. But yeah, it's all online. The courses are held live, they're
right
from 9 to 11 p.m. and whatever evening, Eastern time or whatever the time might be. But if you can't make it at that time, we do record them, and then they're posted on a private forum for the class. So
right.
If you're sick or whatever, you can't make it. And we've had a ton of people, just because they're all over the world, and I can't do classes at every time zone. We've had a ton of people that take the classes and only watch the recording and then interact with us on that specific classroom forum,
right,
where they're posting their work and they can ask follow-up questions after reviewing the videos and all that sort of stuff. So we've created this system by kind of Frankensteining together several different online platforms to create something that's very what I would call holistic sort of approach to it, and in keeping with what I was talking about being an editor and helping people tell their stories. That's really what we do. Like I teach the intro to writing class.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important that people take that from me, because I have written and I've edited, and I'm so engrossed in the industry that it feels like the right thing, and I like meeting energetic people.
Right.
But the methodology that I developed for writing comics is something that's not prescribed. It's not paint by numbers.
Right,
it's designed to give you a place to start, for you to find the story that you've got inside, and bring that out. So it's not about creating Andy Schmidt writer clones.
Exactly.
It's about the world doesn't need more people that write like me. The world needs more storytellers. And that's what we're geared for. And that's true in the art class. It's true that Philip teaches or that Soto teaches.
Cool.
All that kind of stuff.
And where can people find you online?
My Twitter is @ComicExperience, comic with no S, experience.
Okay.
The website is comicsexperience.com with the S in the middle, or Comic Sex Experience, as my brothers pointed out as soon as I announced the thing was a go. Yeah, and we've got a Facebook page, and you can find me on Facebook too.
Cool.
But also, if you're not feeling like a class, coming up in June, the Comics Experience Guide to Writing Comics is coming out from Impact Books, which is a book all about writing comics that I just wrote. And before I wrote it, I sat down with a lot of the other books on writing comics. Greg Pak and Fred Van Lente have Making Comics Like the Pros, and Bendis' book, and Words with Pictures is Bendis' book. There's another one with a similar title from the SVA professors. And I reviewed all this. Peter David has a book on it.
Mm-hmm.
Denny O'Neil. I reviewed all that stuff and realized that there really wasn't a book that got into what happens when you sit down at your computer and then go. There's a lot of why we write. There's a lot of inspiration. Greg and Fred's book is great, but it's really kind of a co-writing book. And all of those books are great, valuable resources. I'm not putting any of them down at all, but mine is really okay, you got a story to tell. Let's figure it out from here, and it goes through a whole methodology. Yeah,
cool.
So I'm very excited about that.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And we're back. So yeah, I think definitely, as we always say, the links are in the description down below. On our website, if you're listening to this through Twitter, make sure you go hit up our website and then click on the link for this episode, and there's links for where you can find Frank and Grief, and there's links on from Andy where you can find out more about Comics Experience. And I really think anyone who's an inspiring creator who has an idea and they're not sure how to workshop it, check them out. Check out their website, see what they have to offer. But our final interview of the episode is
this weird old guy that just like, I guess nobody was talking to at the time, and I kind of felt sorry for him. And he played some janitor in some movie about some wizards, and he also played, I guess, some guy who was just paid to sit at a table and eat while people were slaughtered in front of him. And I guess there was another minor role he played where he took over the role of some doctor person, the first of them apparently. No biggie, right? And of course, if you haven't figured out who we're talking about yet, we're talking about David Bradley. And it's a real pleasure when I get to interview somebody like this, because you never know with some of these interviews who the real person is going to be behind the actor, the parts that they play. David Bradley is like the kindest, nicest old man I've ever met. I wish he were my grandfather. He's like, he has this wonder about him, which is just awesome. And he must have spent years learning how to act that out so that it didn't come through when he was Greyjoy presiding over the Red Wedding.
Or Argus Finch complaining about the kids at Hogwarts.
I know. He's just this nice old guy. And he was, one of the things he did, and this is what we talk about in the interview. Yeah, that's right. I didn't talk about Harry Potter. I didn't talk about Game of Thrones. What we did talk about was that he was given the opportunity to take over the role of the first Doctor from William Hartnell, who passed away years ago. And he played that role in a made-for-TV movie showing the life of William Hartnell and how he became the first Doctor and how Doctor Who just started. And then he also got to play the role of the first Doctor in the last season ending, alongside the last Doctor, the current Doctor, the current -1 Doctor.
Right.
And it just, we talked about that. And when I told him how the reaction was the reaction that people had, if you go to YouTube and you do reaction for the season ender of Doctor Who, the reaction of people is like, oh my God, it's the first Doctor. It's David Bradley. He's come back. And just people crying and jumping out of their seats. And just, it's amazing. And he loves that. He loves his fans. He loves them. He seems to get great joy out of giving his fans great joy. And it's just wonderful to experience that, to be able to talk to a person who feels that way. Is that enough? Did I overdo it? I mean,
no. I think that definitely sets up how excited you were to do this interview. I think it's probably one of your favorite interviews you've ever done.
It is.
Yeah.
It definitely is.
So without further ado, take it away, John.
I'm John O'Grady. I'm with a podcast called Superhero Speak, and I am here with David Bradley, who probably needs no introduction. You were a member of the Royal Shakespeare Company?
I was from 1978, I think, on and off till about 1994, so about 16 years.
And you won an award for your role in King Lear, I believe.
That's right. That was with the National Theatre in the production of King Lear with Brian Cox and Ian McKellen, in which I played the fool, yes, and I won an Olivier, which was great. Yeah.
And we're going to ask you about nothing about that because it's a science fiction convention.
Yeah.
And you have been in Game of Thrones. You've been in Harry Potter, which a lot of people knew you for. My favorite, of course, is when you took the role for William Hartnell for the first Doctor, which for a lot of people was actually really emotional. And I guess I'll ask you first about that. Were you offered the role? Did somebody come to you and say, you look like you might be able to do this? Or?
It came totally out of the blue. Mark Gatiss, I was at an event in London, and Mark Gatiss tapped me on the shoulder, and I'd met him briefly just to say hello, because I knew who he was from a show called The League of Gentlemen, and he was a well-respected writer and actor. And he literally tapped me on the shoulder and said, excuse me, I'm writing this thing about the first Doctor Who for the 50th anniversary of the show. Would you play William Hartnell? And I said, I didn't even say, can I see a script first, which normally one would, but I just knew it was going to be something really special, and I just said yes straight away. So I just said, you say when and I'll be ready. So he came through with a few different drafts of the script over the next few months, I suppose, and it was such a pleasure, and slightly I was slightly awestruck at the first read-through, because there was the original director, Waris Hussain, some of the original cast, William Russell, Carol Ann Ford, Mark Eden, and people who'd been in it with Hartnell and knew him, and his granddaughter Jessica, who appears as an 8-year-old in the actual film. Now she's an agent. She wrote a biography of her grandfather called Who's There? She gave me the book. They also gave me several tapes of the old black and white shows from the 1963 onwards, and so it was, for me, it was such a great help to have all that backup, and I could watch them over and over and try and capture his physical and vocal mannerisms and whatever I needed. It was there, and her book helped me because it gave me an insight into quite a complicated man. And when it came out and his family approved of it, and Mark wrote a script that wasn't always sympathetic towards him. It showed various sides of his nature, but it seemed to me a real human being emerged off the page, and I hope I did that justice.
Yeah, there was a lot of things that went on behind the camera during William Hartnell's tour as the Doctor Who, because he started having trouble remembering certain things.
Yes,
but he's also the one that pioneered stuff like using the same controls on the panel, because he said and you said this, it was part of your script, it was that the fans would remember that if I flip the wrong switch when I say this and that.
Yes, I remember, and that actually happened, and a director said, press that switch and that'll open the doors, and he said, well, no, the switch for opening the doors is on the other side, so I can't do that. And the director said, does it matter? And he let go and said, yes, of course it matters. Kids notice these things, don't underestimate your audience. And he was absolutely right, because they were clued into everything. They knew what everything on that console, what it meant. And he respected that and respected his audience enough to refuse to do it unless it was absolutely right. So I admired him greatly as an actor, not only for Doctor Who, but This Sporting Life, Brighton Rock, The Way Ahead, other films. And he was one of those great British character actors of the time. And so it was an honour to play him, but I also felt a great sense of responsibility to his memory and to his career. So I was relieved and delighted when it got the seal of approval from not only his family but from the audience in general, and I've had such great feedback here as well as other events I've been to, and it's great meeting the real die-hard Doctor Who fans and to get their approval.
Well, I know people that you've literally that last final scene in the short movie, and then that first scene where in the last episode for the last Doctor's tenure, where I think one of your first lines was "Who's there?" Right?
Yes.
In the snowstorm, and I know people that literally cried when that happened.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
there's YouTube videos of people when they first hear your voice.
Yeah.
And they hear you say, "Who's there?" And they jump up, and it's like, "Oh my God, it can't be!"
I haven't seen these, but that's very gratifying to know.
Oh, it is. Had you been a fan of the series before you saw?
I'm old enough to remember William Hartnell as the first Doctor, and I watched it throughout. Patrick Troughton and John Pertwee and Tom Baker, but because I'm working away quite a lot, or if I've been doing theatre, it's usually working on the night it was on. So when it returned, I didn't catch up with it, but and I didn't get a chance to until I worked with Matt Smith on Dinosaurs on a Spaceship,
right?
Playing a really super baddie guy, a real space pirate, and and I thought, well, that will be my Doctor Who experience. I was there, I was in it, and working with Matt. And then Mark Gatiss turns up with this, the idea of me playing the Doctor, and I thought, wow. And that was obviously the reason why they asked me to do the Christmas episode. So I thought, well, I must have done something right. And it's just been at a stage in my career when usually things start to slow down a bit, and suddenly it's just given me an extra little boost of people liking something that you've done that's new,
Well, I mean, this is like the Doctor Who stuff is only one of it's a very small part of your entire body of work that you've done. I mean, you were in, again, Harry Potter, where you were obviously the real hero of the story is Filch. And then you went completely villain in Game of Thrones, which you kind of got scary there.
Yeah.
But that's all this is a far cry from you were originally trained with optical instruments or something? You were...
Yes. I worked in a factory that made microscopes and surveyor's levels and theodolites and things like that. And but to be honest, I wasn't... it was because at the time you left school, and if you didn't have any qualifications, which I didn't, your parents and your mentors and teachers would say, get a trade. So I got a trade. I went into engineering. But really, I wasn't passionate about it, and my heart wasn't really... It was a job, and I made some nice friends out of it, and I enjoyed it on a certain level, but it creatively and satisfaction-wise, it wasn't quite cutting the mustard. But then when I just got into amateur dramatics through a youth club that I joined, and I kind of got roped in because they just needed kids to be in musicals and shows of all kinds. And then I discovered Shakespeare, and I thought, wow, this is fun. But never thought for a moment I would do it for a living. It was just something, and if I hadn't turned professional, I would still be doing it in a non-professional capacity, because I just realised it was something this was something I really liked doing, and just playing different characters, and it's been like that all the way through, enjoying the diversity and not just being typecast, because a lot of actors do get typecast, and it's work, and it's satisfying to a certain degree, but it works for some more than others, but for me it's having different challenges and different people to explore has been for me the whole pleasure of doing the job.
What was what is the role that you like playing the most? You've played a very wide array of characters.
Yeah, but whoever I've played, I've enjoyed it. there have been. It hasn't always been like this, of course. As any actor will say, there are some things I've done that I thought, oh, this is going to be good, and then the series gets dropped after the first episode, or it never even gets aired, or it's a movie that ends up on an aeroplane or something, and or straight to DVD and then disappears without trace. And we've all had those, and I've had my fair share. So it's particularly gratifying when these things come your way, like Harry Potter and Thrones and Doctor Who and The Strain, of course, which was just a great part, and so they've all been equally pleasurable in different ways. So I can't really honestly say I have a favourite.
Well, that's good. From what you're describing, you really enjoy it so much that any challenging character is a good character. Then.
Yes, and this September it'll be exactly 50 years since I signed my first theatre contract. So
wow.
So I've been very fortunate being able to do what I do and what I love doing for a living, and I still feel as enthusiastic now as I did then. So no complaints.
And you have a very large fan base that really appreciates your work. So
well, that's why it's nice to come to places like this and meet them and just hear it from their own mouths, Yeah.
Well, like I said, you go to YouTube and you look up the videos of people for that last episode of Doctor Who that you did, and they hear your voice. You'll love the reaction. You really will.
Oh, right. Well, you must tell me how to access this, because I'm not very technological. But thanks. I shall look that up.
Thank you for taking the time to talk to me. I really appreciate it.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
John, I think there might be some people complaining, well, he's not really superhero related. But lest we forget, he was in Captain America: The First Avenger.
Oh, yeah.
He was the Tower Keeper. It was a minor little role, but hey, he was there. So
there you go. There's your Kevin Bacon. But yeah, now again, whenever I get to do an interview like this, I got to tell you guys, I feel completely inadequate when I do these. I feel like I've been getting better over these last few years, and I'm trying to continue to get better. There's nothing we can do about my voice. Sorry. Even auto-tuning just makes it worse. But, trying to dive into how he feels when he's doing these roles, how these people get to these roles, and, what makes them tick. I've been working on that, and it's just if we can do more of these interviews for you, we will brave the security teams that chase us. We will avoid the apparent dogs that they keep leashed behind the scenes. It's our pleasure to bring these to you.
I will just say I'm going to say two things in closing. And this is another aside, John. Don't worry. I think you do a great job with these interviews. You know, I am proud that you're my co-host. You do a great job on the show. So, in closing, two things, boys and girls. If you are in the Philadelphia area and you're going to be at Wizard World this coming weekend, please make sure you can track John down. He'll be running around with a backpack with microphones sticking out of it and a black and a black Superhero Speak T-shirt. And you can find me and Artist Alley at Greg Horn's table. I don't know the table number right now. Greg kind of did everything last minute this year, so I'll find out when I arrive to set everything up Thursday morning. But yeah, if you're a fan of the show or you're a fan of Greg's, come by the table, say hi. You know, we can shoot the shit, as it were.
Yep. And then, just
go ahead.
And just remember that for each one of these interviews, if you do want to see more information about these people, the authors, you know, their links and all that, even we have pictures of the authors and the people who we've interviewed. Go to our website, go to the interview link, and please, you know, use these people's links. Go to their Facebooks, go to their Twitters. We have all their information there. Follow up on some of them. Some of these will tell you, like that, you know, if you're feeling grief, for this interview, go to Frank Gogol's site and take a look at this comic. It might help you work through some stuff. In the future, with our other interviews, we'll have links for, you know, the other books and comics that we're talking about. And you really should check some of these out. They're really interesting.
I mean, we can tease a little. We've got another great episode coming up that's going to feature Dirk Manning, and
Dirk Manning's cool. I like him.
We're going to be talking about his new book, which is his first foray into superheroes, and it's kind of a mind-blowing story. And I'm just going to leave it at that.
Yeah. I've got a lot to say about that. I'm going to save it though.
Yes. And then the other, go ahead, John.
No, go ahead. Yeah, after you.
I was going to say, and the other thing, a little bit of a tease, John doesn't even know about this. I set up an interview at Wizard World through our contact there. I mean, it's not a done deal yet, but if it is, it'll be another interview John's very excited for. And we're just going to leave it at that.
Okay. Just other teases. Jody Lynn Nye, of the Myth Adventure series and several of her own series. Carrie Lynn Smith, who also worked on that comic book with Dirk Manning. And we also will be talking with Pinups for Pitbulls, which is our basically our charity shout out. We always interview at least one or two charities while we're at these things.
And of course, Pinups for Pitbulls. How can you say no to that?
Nope, you cannot. Because they had pit bulls, of course.
They draw you in with
bad. The ladies at Pinups for Pitbulls would definitely hit me for saying that.
They draw you in with the pinups and keep you there with the pit bulls.
Yeah. But they're such cute pit bulls. You wait. You'll hear the interview.
All right, boys and girls. So we hope you enjoyed this episode. Thanks for listening. And as always, don't let your cake be caught in the door. Have a good week.